It's Monday, and we are having a meeting between President Trump and Ukrainian President Zelenskyy that's going to happen today. A lot of the press, as we predicted, was going to say this was a big failure because they didn't decide to report the news beforehand, which was going into it saying, hey, this is not going to be a peace talk. This is not going to be the decision-making time. This is to get to round two. This is maybe just to get to have them eventually meet together.
Right.
Nothing was ever going to come of this of extreme substance. But of course, that's not how the media decided to spin it.
That's right. And of course, as the Secretary of State Marco Rubio made the rounds on the Sunday shows yesterday, he was trying to lay out for everyone, as President Trump said before the meeting, he wasn't going there to negotiate on behalf of Ukraine. He was going to try to get them to the table. And this is how Secretary of State Rubio framed even what the entire point of it was. And if you see our title about what it means to negotiate a peace deal, let's go ahead and roll Byte 14.
This is about what Ukraine can accept and what Russia can accept. They both have to accept it. Otherwise, there won't be a peace deal. Okay? If there aren't concessions, if one side gets everything they want, that's called surrender. That's called the end of the war through surrender. And that's not what we're close to doing because neither side here is on the verge of surrender or anything close to it.
Well, and Jordan, I think that's the entire point here is that Russia has made gains. I don't think there's a world ever, no matter who's president, that would be able to negotiate something where Russia surrenders. And at that point, that is what the left media is calling for, is a surrender from Russia, which has been on the offensive for several years now and taken territory, that at some point, if you want the war to end, there has to be negotiation.
Yeah, and there has to be the best outcome for the parties involved. So an outcome that Ukraine can accept, an outcome that Russia can accept, and go to their domestic audiences and say, you know, we got what we needed out of this. In Ukraine's case, it was what the U.S. has got on the table is basically like an Article 5 security pact without joining NATO. And in exchange, so you'd have all of Europe and the United States backing you up against future potential Russian aggression in exchange for land and some of those territories that Russia has held in dispute since before they even invaded and took Crimea. So this is, again, the sticking point. Now, so far, Zelenskyy has always said when it comes to land, they're not having any discussions there. So I think what's key today is there any wiggle room there? Does he open up the door to any room in this Ukrainian region, which is primarily Russian-speaking, and has, when there have been votes taken, the people there have not been opposed to rejoining Russia. Most of them consider themselves ethnic Russians and speak the Russian language.
Rick, if you listen to any of the media, really, all you're hearing is that President Trump was played by Putin. No, he didn't even get anything, didn't get a ceasefire. They ignore that President Trump, even beforehand, said, my goal here is not to negotiate for Ukraine. It's to bring the two to the table. What are your thoughts, cutting through all the noise about what we saw on Friday?
Well, look, anyone who thinks that you can have one meeting and immediately have a ceasefire has never done diplomacy.
Right.
This is what the microwave generation likes. They want it instantaneously. But it's very difficult to bring about peace after you have a full-fledged war. And I will remind everybody that Donald Trump kept the peace. And that is just as difficult. Keeping the peace is very difficult. But once you delve into war, and then you have to dig yourself out. I mean, Joe Biden handed us a terrible situation where he was unwilling to talk to the Russians, and we saw massive war. It was getting worse every single month, and then suddenly President Trump comes in office and the media is like, why aren't you producing a ceasefire? Well, if it was easy, Joe Biden would have done it. And the fact of the matter is that the Democrats, and I want to say a special criticism of Senator Chris Van Hollen, because he seems to be one of the leaders of the microwave generation. He wants instantaneous solutions from Trump, while he had infinite patience for President Biden. And I don't think that that's fair. I think it's very political. It's what politicians do. They don't hold people of different parties to the same standards. But one thing that I do know is that Donald Trump is not one of these people who issues a policy and then walks away and says, I issued a policy, everybody should follow it. He's constantly watching to see if it was implemented properly, if it's working. We have never had a president who is so willing to adjust a policy very quickly when it's not working. And that's what I love. He is monitoring. Believe you me, I spoke to him over this weekend. Literally, the man is working nonstop. And what he wants to be able to do is monitor, get as much information, talk to as many people as possible. But he is absolutely in charge and sees the long term. He is a strategist. He is a negotiator. And we've got to give him a little space here.
I think when you see President Trump clearly having a long flight, flying to Alaska, having to fly back, all the things that are having to get done for these meetings, but was very clear and very upfront before this meeting saying, look, I don't plan on walking out of here with an agreement. I plan on walking out of here, hopefully getting us to round 2 of a meetings where now we'll meet with Zelenskyy and hopefully we can get them to the table. Of course, though, the media had to run with this crazy narrative that the goal was to walk out of there with it all said and done. Of course, would everyone have loved that? Would have been amazing? Sure. But it simply wasn't going to be the case, and we knew that going in, but that didn't stop the headlines. And the headlines coming in from, what is it now, Will? It's not MSNBC anymore.
MS Now.
MS Now, my source now. It didn't stop that narrative from being what they've tried to push this weekend, which was couldn't get anything done. Nothing happened. All we did was bow down to Putin, when clearly that's not the case and was never the spoken goal of this entire summit.
Look, I've been in tens of thousands of diplomatic negotiations, and let me just tell you how they go. You put one side in a room and you talk to them and you figure out what's their lowest kind of common denominator, or what will they accept, where will they move, and where are they absolutely not willing to go. And then you have to go to the other side and listen to theirs, and then you have to come up with really creative solutions. That's diplomacy. And it all starts once you get them to agree and say, okay, I'm going to take a little bit of a faith effort jump. I'm going to step out. I'm going to believe you. I'm going to try to believe the other side. We're both going to come together with some faith. And at that moment, when there's a handshake or when there's an agreement, that's when the real diplomacy has to begin. To hold it, you have to go back, and the same people who negotiated the peace have to be the ones that hold it to account, because you know the vulnerabilities. You know exactly where they bent, where they moved, where they didn't really want to move, but they did. And so they're going to be a little sensitive and jumpy on watching that moment break. And so I think that if you haven't done diplomacy, you should take a step back and trust the people who are actually doing the negotiations, and recognize that these things are incredibly difficult. We didn't get into this situation overnight. We're not going to get out of it overnight.